Our next speaker is Pat Jefferies from ASSA ABLOY. Pat is a member of the British Standards Institute and sits on the board of CEN. He's the commercial director of ASSA ABLOY and has 28 years experience in the locking industry. Needless to say, he's an expert in all regulations pertaining to the door. So if I could invite Pat up to speak about construction product regulations.
Thank you. Well, thank you, and for the nice welcome. It's nice to be back actually for the second year. Unlike my colleague there, the previous speaker, I actually have been to this building once before. Unfortunately, that was before it actually opened, and that was actually doing some snagging. So it's actually nice to be here and not a pair of jeans today. So firstly, welcome to this part of the session. Really, the slide up there is designed to be an introduction to me. But one of the things that I'm not going to be doing today really is actually talking too much about the ABLOY product. This is some of the stuff that we actually get involved in, and indeed some of the areas that we represent the industry. And to some extent, I will say that I'm actually here today representing, should we say, the unsexy part of the solution. But one of the things I always like to say to people is we really need to think about the door in a little bit more detail, because actually the door is often the user interface. So the door is very much the part of all of these systems that our customers and their staff potentially are going to use to actually interface with them. So it really is quite an important part. And there are indeed certain things that we should be aware of. Yep, clearly I was pressing the wrong button. We did actually have a little blip just now with the technology, and considering we're all selling technology-based products, it's always technology that lets us down. Now, just to make you feel at home, if you'd actually come to our office in Willenhall in the sunny Midlands, I can assure you that for half an hour before you arrived, we'd actually be trying to get the technology to work for us. So, moving forward, I do thank you. It's the second year I've been invited. That's quite pleasing, really, because my subject's about standards. Let's be fair, it's not the most riveting. So the very fact that I've been invited back, I actually take as quite a compliment. So I'm rather hoping that some of you may have seen the presentation that I did last year on the constructions product regulation. And what I'm really intending to do today is to just give you an overview of what we discussed last year. And of course, it's all about fire and it's all about escape. But the reality is it's all about life safety. And life safety is something that we should all really understand, particularly when we're specifying access control systems, we're using cameras, we're using electronics, we're using connectivity to actually empower everything. But actually, our basic human rights are all about being able to escape a building in the need to, if we have a need to escape. But equally, actually accepting that some of these doors, and there are actually 2 doors down there that are actually marked as fire doors, we take them for granted. But in reality, they actually have a very, very important role to actually perform, because they are the difference between us surviving in a major fire and us potentially dying. So that's actually a fire door. But equally, we've actually got escape doors. And you'll notice I'm not using the word fire escape. I'll come back to why in a minute. But those escape doors are equally critical, because if we actually need to escape, we know where we're going. We've seen the green man. What we're actually going to try and do is we're going to try and get out of the building to maintain life. So this is all very much about life safety. The reality is these things always evolve, and there have been some major changes from last year moving on into this year. And again, I'm going to say to you they're actually good changes. Of course, I have to be honest here and actually say they're good changes because they fuel my business. But the reason I'm saying they're good changes is because, in all honesty, they actually provide us with a better outcome in terms of our ability to be able to escape, or the protection we need if we find ourselves in the event of fire. The standard we've actually got here is actually ISEN 13637 for electrically controlled escape doors. Now that's actually a relatively new standard. Actually didn't get published until 2008 last year. And of course, it is a European standard. Now, European standards, and obviously being an Englishman, I'm standing here just having voted to remain in Europe, but unfortunately my fellow citizens actually voted for us to leave. Reality is that won't change anything, because there's always this thought that this is a European standard, it's part of the common market. It's actually not. It's something called CENLEC. CENLEC is a body outside of the European Union. Now, you guys are all Europeans, so Europe will remain with Ireland, but from a UK perspective, we won't be leaving these standards behind. So recapping a little bit on what I talked to you about last year, I talked to you about the construction's product regulations and the minimum performance criteria that it actually dictates for certain door types. It's something that is mandatory throughout the European Union. Now, the construction's product regulation actually is something that will be embedded in every member state's law. And what we're really looking at from this perspective, you know, we know about CE marking. Our daughter's teddy bear, our mobile phone, it has a CE mark. But there is some significance to what that CE marking is all about. There are also different levels of attestation. Nasty word, but it means different levels that we need to actually meet. But when we're actually looking at fire or escape, CE marking applies to harmonised standards. Now, there are lots of standards, but if you have a standard that's harmonised, it's not nice to, it legally is you must do. And it doesn't really matter what we write in terms of law, because the construction's product regulation is embedded in every member state's law. Actually, your Department of the Environment, I've been working with them for about 3 years. You're just about to receive new building regulations Part B, safety in the event of fire. They will be published early next year. First one's residential, but it will then follow on into commercial. They actually take account of the construction's product regulation. They also take account of this new standard, ISEN 13637. So you guys are quite a way ahead of us in the UK. I'm going to cover what harmonised standards are a little bit later on, but you'll see they've got an HEN rather than just an EN. But from our particular point here really now, it really is a requirement that varies depending upon the door type. So having established that there are only 6 different door types, so that's the first lie, if you like. But the reality is there are actually only 6 different door types. Clearly there are hundreds of different door types. There are wooden doors, there are metal doors, aluminium doors, composite doors. But that's actually not the question I'm asking. What I'm actually asking is, what was their design purpose? And you'll see as we move forward, and it was something we discussed last year, we've only got 6 different door types. And if we can establish what those door types are, we then can ensure we get the right product to suit the door type, and indeed to suit the construction of the door, because that's actually a secondary consideration. So having discussed this, the thing that we need to look at here is, what does it call for in terms of European legislation? Why do the Europeans say don't call that a fire exit? It's quite an important distinction. One of the things that we teach, and we teach quite often, we actually present this to 700 people a year. There's a foundations course that we'll talk about a little bit later on. But fire doors are not necessarily emergency or panic escape route doors. Traditionally in the UK, apologies, I thought I'd removed every reference to the UK, every reference to British standard, but I haven't. But it equally applies to Ireland. We've actually called these doors fire exits. And there's no doubt it's caused a great deal of confusion. We get people actually ring us and say, I've actually got a fire door. What do I need to secure that door? Well, actually, by the time we finished talking to them, we realised they actually didn't have a fire door. They had a fire exit. But a fire door might have a deadlock on it. So the specification that's been written because of this confusion has actually blocked people in. And if you actually use the word fire exit in a European standards meeting, the German guy will stand up and half an hour later you say, please, it was a mistake. I didn't mean to say it. I do understand the difference. And they actually say, well, is fire exit a good word? No, they don't think it is. Are all fire exits the same risk? No, they don't think it is. So they collectively call them emergency escape. And if you remember, the standard we've already mentioned talks about emergency escape, not fire escape. So they define them as panic or emergency or panic escape doors. And actually, I'm going to agree with them. I actually think that that's a better description of the door's use. Because I agree that that door, if it was locked by a magnet, we've actually got a fire alarm sensor in the room. And if there was a fire alarm activation, when I get to that door, I agree, it's free, I can walk through it. But what if the emergency was a gas leak? How do I escape? Because that smoke detector won't have released that door. Do I actually break the emergency call point and risk a potential spark? Or do I hope I've got enough oxygen to survive until I'm rescued? How do you think we'd stand in a court of law when there is a recognised way to escape through that door, but we actually couldn't? Just really food for thought. Because we've had these standards for a long, long time, and these standards they are already partly in your building regulations, but they will be embedded quite firmly in your building regulations when they're republished. Emergency escape doors should be accessible via a live lever handle or paddle handle at all times. A panic escape door will be via a panic bar. What's the difference? Well, realistically, the difference is relatively simple, because if we've got an emergency escape door, we've got staff who are familiar with the building. They're trained users. The European standard says less than 60 people escaping through that set. Now, the reality is your building regulations Part B reduces that to 50. If we've got more than 50 people escaping, but we've got 100 people in the room and we've got 2 doors, well, we divide the 100 people by 2. So we've only got 50 per door. So we don't really want to put a panic bar where we don't need to. But certainly in this type of environment, we should expect to escape via a panic bar. Because the one thing we are sure of is when we get to that door, we can't have any confusion. Wherever I touch that door across 60% of the width, the door will open in the direction of escape and allow us to escape. An emergency escape door could open in. But isn't that a compromise? Well, no, not really, because you're a trained user, you're familiar, you do regular escape drills, so you know the door opens in. So just really briefly running over that one. So what standards do we have? Well, we have standards that represent everything on the door. So if I actually let these standards click through, you'll see a theme appear in here, because I actually want you to think of as a door as a hole in the wall. Because that's exactly what the door is. It's a hole in the wall that's convenient for us to access, egress, move around the building. But actually that's not its main design use. Where you actually see a green bowed standard, that's actually a mandatory requirement under the construction's product regulation. That's a harmonised standard. If you see a red one, it's a harmonised standard for a fire door. Where there's a black one, it's actually a nice to do, and it just completes the picture. So we can specify the door from the hole in the wall, right from the hinges, right the way through to actually the escape device or the fire door lock. What we also need to be doing here is actually supplying declarations of performance. Again, that's not a nice to, that's actually a legal requirement. Any product that's fitted onto an escape or fire door must be supported by a declaration of performance. And this actually unfolds because as the building becomes used, the responsible person in the building needs to maintain their fire and escape doors. That's a legal requirement. And one of the ways they prove that the products are suitable for the application is actually through this declaration of performance. But let's not confuse ourselves with declaration of performance. It doesn't say it's a great product. All it actually says is it meets the minimum requirements as specified under the construction's product regulation. So if I've got an escape door, my minimum requirement now is that the product works for 250,000 operations. We test our products to 2 million operations. but I can't boast. All I can say, will it perform 250,000? Yes. So declaration of performance is important, but it's all about minimum performance criteria. And this is really back to my hole in the wall now, because, you know, how do we actually classify doors? Well, you know, I've already established that a door is there for one of 3 reasons, and I've got 6 door types. So what are those reasons? Well, convenience, you know. It's quite nice to have a door there. And actually, you know, it's bloody cold in Ireland in the winter, so we'd like a door to keep the wind and the rain out, so it's convenient. But actually, that door there is for fire protection. That's a life-critical application. That one over there is all about escape, life-critical application. So, yes, they're both convenient. That one's actually a fire door. That one's an escape door, and I expect if I look more carefully, it's probably a fire door as well. You're beginning to see where my six doors come from. There is something that people say to me, you've got missing, because, you know, 28 years in the industry, I've actually been selling security, and there's no mention of security. Why not? Because life safety actually comes first. But actually, there now is a drive for security. And if you actually specify correctly from convenience, fire and escape, security you can add on. Take that a little bit further, my 6 door types. Door type A, non-fire door, non-escape. You know, it's just a convenience door. If I'm brutally honest, we can fit whatever we like. But if we take door type B, non-fire door, emergency escape door, that's probably the final door that we're going to escape through. There's a life-critical, life-safety element to that. So that's actually mandatory under the Constructions Product Regulation. If we move through all of those doors, we can actually see we've got a door type, A, B, C, D, E, F, that will suit every door in a building. So once we've established which one of those doors we've got, we can then begin to build together what that specification should be. So we've established that's actually an escape door. We believe the risk is panic because potentially we could have more than 50 people in here. And it's probably a fire door. I'm not going to look, but let's assume it actually is. It would be door type F. It's actually a fire and a panic escape door. 2 requirements under the Constructions Product Regulation. Number 1, we need fire tested product because it's a fire door. It must give us fire protection, life safety. Number 2, we must be able to escape in a panic situation. So it clearly is door type F, fire and panic escape. And this is really where we now move on to what we might call a typical access control specified door. And this again is where we need to join our 2 elements together. You know, ACT make great access control products, but their responsibility to some extent stops at the wires provided to the door. My skill set, I don't sell access control. I'm not actually an access control specialist. I'm actually a hardware specialist, and my job is to join my wires to the ACT system to actually make an integrated, user-friendly interface for our users to use, but knowing that they're actually safe in the building in terms of fire and escape. That's actually a real door, by the way, and it's a very interesting way to see one of these horrible devices, a magnet fitted. Now, interestingly, you know, how would we actually escape through that door in an emergency? We can see it's an emergency escape door. I will tell you what's on a government building in the United Kingdom. Well, actually, there is a request to exit button and an emergency call point, but unfortunately, the plant is actually covering it up. Now, that's kind of the typical solution we actually see. I'm not going to be able to escape through that door in the event of an emergency, particularly if it's a gas leak or something else. And this is really where we start to come back in to bring all of this information back together. So this one did have an emergency call point. But in reality, this has been used as an excuse not to do it properly. And this is really where ISEM 13637 is giving us clarification. It's bringing all of the components back together, and it's actually covering up this excuse of, well, okay, it's not, a magnet is not covered by an escape standard. Well, actually, no, it is. What we do know is that you will get new building regulations. I've already mentioned that. You know, I've been working quite closely with your Directorate for Fire and Emergency Planning, also with your Department of the Environment in developing these new standards. So this is something that will come about early in the new year. I've actually mentioned this bit about security, and this is actually a UK video. It's produced by CPNI. It's also endorsed by various bodies in the UK, and it's actually taken a slightly different look at fail unlocked escape doors and why we actually have them. So let me run the video because it's all about dynamic lockdown.
The people there are there to kill you, so to get out of that building as quickly as possible. You need to stay alert but not alarmed. There is no point staying to negotiate this. Get yourself away from the danger zone. The people who are there to carry out these terrorist attacks are there to kill you and your Western lifestyle. And hiding within that building, it's behind really steel doors, main properties where you could barricade yourself in. There's no point hiding below a desk or behind a normal wall. It's keeping quiet, evolving situation here. You need to ring 999, you need to get information out there as quickly as possible. How many offenders there is, what type of weapon they're carrying, and has there been casualties taken.
Okay, well, really that's something that's been driven by CPNI, and what they're actually saying is if we think about some of these terrorist events that we've actually had throughout Europe, but let's move away from Europe and actually go to America where they're actually obsessed with everything failing unlocked. Think of the mad gunman that's actually got into some of these schools and actually killed lots of pupils. If we'd actually thought about it and actually looked at dynamic lockdown, which is becoming very much a buzzword in the United Kingdom, what we could have done is we could have potentially prevented a lot of these deaths. So, okay, message was simple. Run, get out. If you can't get out, find somewhere safe to barricade yourself in. You can't do that if all of your doors have failed unlocked. And thirdly, get the message out to the emergency services. The mad gunman's got into the American school. He's pressed the central alarm button. Everything's failed unlocked. He's got free run of the building. If we actually observe some of these standards and understand what the Europeans have been doing for a long time and separating this fire escape and understanding its emergency or panic, we can split the door in half. Because sure, we can provide a way to get out. That's not a problem. We can always get out in the event of an emergency. We can run. But what if we actually need to hide? Well, if that door fails unlocked, totally useless. But if we actually split that door in half and make it secure from the outside, but allow you to escape from the inside, we can actually prevent these kind of situations and actually provide an extra level of life safety, now labelled security. So when we look at the new standard, ISEM 13637, it talks about 3 elements. And this is actually fairly key because if we go backwards to our emergency or panic escape doors, and I couldn't change the BS on that bit that I've thrown in there because it was a picture, but it can be translated to IS. I said to you it's a lever handle or a paddle handle or a crash bar. Well, that's actually slightly misleading because, as always, this is a life safety device. And when it's life safety, it actually talks about the handle, it talks about the lock case, and it talks about the strike plate. They all need to be tested together and covered with by a declaration of performance. You can't test an individual component. So if I actually decide I'm going to upgrade my mechanical lock and put on an electric strike, I've just committed a criminal offence because I no longer have a declaration of performance covering that application. What might happen under side pressure? The door always needs to open. So it's not as simple as just the one component. Exactly the same with the new standard. It talks about control, it talks about activation, and it talks about blocking, because collectively those 3 elements give you an escape door system. This is the 3 elements, looking at them typically. We won't have a break glass. We'll have a resettable button. That provides the control. The button in the middle provides the activation. And in actual fact, the blocking device might be a magnet, but more likely to be an electric strike, and probably won't be an electric lock. Typically this is used, I mean this picture actually is a kindergarten, it's a slightly different setup, but this is all about if you think, look, these children are going to escape, and if they press the button they run out onto a main road, shouldn't we actually make it slightly safer? Well, that's what we're able to do with this. We've actually got three possibilities. And this again becomes a little bit odd because, you know, my 1125 door over there, my panic escape door, I now could actually block that door by overlaying a 13637 solution, which seemed a bit strange initially, but if you think back to this dynamic lockdown, sure, I'm providing dynamic lockdown. I don't want people to go out and have a cigarette outside. I know it's not outside, but I don't want people using it as a smoking door. This provides for that. I maybe want to read in, read out access control. You shouldn't have been doing that on an escape door. You now legally can. So it's often overlaid on top of an existing mechanical system. Or it could be on an emergency escape door to 179. I see there's another BS creeped in here. Or unusually, what we now do is the norm, which is actually an electric door on its own, we arguably probably shouldn't be using as many of them because we need to provide this dynamic lockdown as well. But what we will see is these will all combine into a system that's a lot more intelligent than the systems we've traditionally been using. And like I say, this is not a nice to, this is actually a must to under European legislation, and your building regulations will be catching up. So, you know, what are the benefits? Well, actually, it's possible to provide life safety and security. It's possible to actually have it fail unlocked from the inside, but fail locked from the outside. It, of course, gives us this dynamic lockdown, okay, an English thing, but, you know, it's not really just English, it's actually a European message. And for the first time ever, it's possible to have a read-in, read-out access control application that's actually standards compliant and legal. You know, we're not going to find ourselves in court 3 years down the road for what we've actually specified. And of course, really the bigger thing here is, and you know, we've talked a lot today about integration. This actually is an integration product. There's absolutely no reason why it shouldn't work with your ACT access control system. My colleagues over there are talking about building management systems. The next speaker is going to talk about CCTV. I hope I've got that right. All of those are systems that we potentially may need to integrate this to. Because if I block an escape door, which is technically possible under the standard, albeit not allowed in Ireland, or the UK, by the way, but there will be applications where we might need to do that, where there's a bigger risk. You know, let's think of an institution where we've got mentally unstable people, or we've got people with Alzheimer's. Maybe we might block that. If we do, we absolutely need integration with the CCTV, because I need to be able to make a decision whether you need to escape or whether you don't need to escape. Sorry, I couldn't find the nice words to actually say what I was trying to say there. So integration is really the next step. One of the things I do find is, look, gentlemen, you know, ladies and gentlemen, apologies. I've given you a brief overview. I've thrown lots of numbers out. I probably have confused you. We do run regular courses, which we call a foundations course. It's all about the door. It's all about the standards. It moves from hinges through door closers. It talks about escape devices, it talks about fire security, it talks about escape compliance. You're all more than welcome. Now, you know, we run these regularly, about 700 people a year go through them from our Willenhall base. But, you know, Willenhall's not a nice place to be. I don't live anywhere near there, by the way. I'd much rather be in Ireland anyway. I'm perfectly happy to come and run it for you. It really is a 6.5-hour course. Apologies. It's boring because standards are boring. I try to make it as interesting as possible, related to real doors, but the knowledge gained from that will begin to help you make sense of the limited bit I've given you today. So, from my perspective, thank you. It's nice to be invited back. Nice to be in this arena. Thank you, ACT. And I'm going to sit down, so thank you.